Thank you for joining us, everyone. Today, we are very honored to be sitting down with Paul Jenkins. Paul Jenkins has a very storied career. He helped create numerous Marvel stories that might be credited for pulling the brand out of Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Those stories include Wolverine Origin, Hellblazer, The Inhumans, Spectacular Spider-Man, and The Sentry. He's won numerous awards such as the Eisner Award, the Wizard Fan Award 5 times, as well as the Prism Award. He's a writer, editor, and cross-media artist. He's particularly interested in the future of storytelling and technologies that could be applied to the art of storytelling. Thank you so much for joining us today, Paul.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
And I should say that you are involved also in a NFT form of storytelling today with Bitcoin Origins, which I think we'll get into a little bit later and that our audience will find very interesting. So I'm curious, Paul, I guess, could you kind of speak to your experience as an artist and a storyteller and how it all led to blockchain, crypto, and NFTs?
Yeah, I mean, I think perhaps it's fair to say of me that I've always taken a chance on the forgotten child of literature. So, when I first worked in the entertainment business, I studied to be an actor, and I spent most of my time in film school, and I thought that would be my career path. But I came to the United States when I was very young. I was 20 years old, and I met a couple of guys that had a black and white comic book, and it ended up being the Ninja Turtles. So I was the third employee over there, and the thing exploded, and all of a sudden we found ourselves, in a maelstrom of crazy. And there were a couple of things that I think really shaped my career, and some of them are potentially personal, and some of them are just almost circumstance. The personal side of it is that I am a person that's never particularly been afraid of things. I grew up in a relatively deprived situation. I lived in the countryside. My father left when I was very young, and my single mum, who has some interesting mental health issues, raised two crazy little boys. We lived in a caravan at times. We lived in a house with no electricity. We were the poorest kids I've ever known. But it didn't worry me or upset me or scare me. Having nothing or not having electricity or food or whatever did not ever upset me. I think I just accepted it, and I was quite happy to move around it. So potentially, I think, when you look at that question of nature versus nurture, I often feel that it's nature exclusively, certainly with me. I don't think that my upbringing would lead me to any kind of success. But I made a decision when I was very young to follow things that I think probably helped me, like learning how to spell as a little kid, learning how to read, doing lots of sports, doing things that were always productive and never destructive. And I think that path kind of led me into the Ninja Turtles, where when this happened and it exploded, I was perfectly capable of dealing with it. I was very young, but I suddenly was working in licensing, and then I was a director of a publishing company. I was very young, and editor-in-chief, and all of those things. And so having success wasn't something that seemed abnormal to me. It seemed like an average Wednesday, just like not having success did. All of them seemed like average Wednesdays. We're in the COVID pandemic right now, and I'm the same today as I was before, and I will probably be the same afterwards. So I think I was kind of geared to never being afraid of things. I had spent my whole life not being afraid of things. And true audacity is not necessarily, let's say you're writing a comic book. Audacity doesn't come from writing a scene in which stuff blows up, because that just looks great. And you can, Batman punches the Joker is a great piece that you can sell at a convention. But perhaps the audacity would be in, writing a 4-page scene in a coffee shop. That's audacious if the story calls for it and you take up 4 pages of real estate in a comic. Perhaps audacity comes in innovating in video game design and storytelling, where you don't know how to do it, but that doesn't matter. You're going to do it anyway. And I think that's really why I have been able to do okay with new media and new forms of storytelling, because I'm not afraid of them. It's almost like I approach the thing, the answer is yes. What's the question?
And I think that speaks to an innate creativity. I'm curious, when did you first tell a story, or what was the first story you created?
My mum will say the first story I ever created. I started drawing comic books when I was a little kid. We didn't have comic books, but we had a couple of them, and I thought, well, I'll do that. And I drew a book called Alfred and the Egg Giants, and it went downhill from there. Um, I I was always creative. I think I would tell myself stories. So one thing that people that know me pretty well, I don't think anyone understands how I do it, but it's not that I do it by conscious thought. It's just that it happens to me. I am not a person that sleeps very well. I have always been a terrible insomniac. And so at night, as a little kid, in this awful situation where my mum and my brother were asleep, and we didn't have any food, we didn't have any money, and it was cold in the winter, and I was awake, and I would always be awake by myself, and I was quite scared of the dark because I didn't like being awake in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, with owls hooting outside and all that kind of stuff. And so I think that those experiences gave me kind of an imagination. And one of the things that I've written about quite a lot is walking into a forest, which I have always done. Walk into a forest in the pitch black and walk your way through it, and as if you come out the other side, something about you will have changed. So I think you approach creativity from a perspective of fearlessness, then I think you can always succeed, because you have to add a few things together: work ethic, personal ethic, fearlessness, and creativity, and you will probably succeed. That can apply as much to a massive multi-million-dollar movie as it does to a small comic book.
I think the first story I ever wrote must have been in the first grade, and it was about human beings. And then I learned that we are actually human beings, and I think I was a little bit confused at that point. But could you kind of discuss your journey in creating increasingly sophisticated or touching stories?
Yeah, that's a good question. I like that one. So I think that no story can be seen through the lens of just an event. One thing that amazed me in being involved in the comic book industry as a creator was how incredibly uncreative so many people are. When you're involved in film and animation and television, when you work in Los Angeles and in that business, you are constantly amazed by how most people in that business are like business majors, but they don't understand creativity. And so they demean creatives. They tend to look down on creative people as if we're the brand or the product, but nothing more, and that we can never do the business of the work, But that's not true. We can. So I think, when I got into storytelling, I realized early on that it was simply a reflection of us. Like, if you hold up a comic book or a video game or anything, you're simply putting up a mirror that you're looking into. That anything that you do or see is simply a reflection of the human experience. And so what you need to work out as a storyteller is, how honest are you prepared to be? Are you going to tell people how you feel, or what you're afraid of, or what you love or hate, or anything like that? If you can write that, then you are being honest, and people will see themselves in that, reflected in what you create. Where I feel that I was given an opportunity to innovate is especially in video game storytelling. That, when I first got into it, I was being told many times by people in the industry, look, this is just interactive entertainment. It's a game. Games are not stories. You can't make a game into a story. And my answer when someone does that to me, I always say it's like my Marty McFly from Back to the Future. When someone calls him a chicken, he immediately turns and walks back and gets in a fight. If you tell me I can't do something, then I immediately say, that means you can't do it, and I start trying to do it. And so whether it's stupid or stubbornness or maybe confidence, I don't know, But I was told that you can't make stories in video games, and that to me made me say, yes, I can. And so I worked very hard towards innovating in game design and storytelling.
Storytelling is quite an human activity. And I recently watched a movie called Wag the Dog. And in this film, it seems that every storyline is brought to its most extreme and absurd outcome. And I found it very powerful how, despite how absurd this movie was, how at the end of it, it also seemed quite realistic. And that's the power of storytelling, I think. I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious, where did this attitude come from where when someone told you that you can't do something, you thought, yes, I can?
I would imagine that it's not because I was special or anything like that. It was that as a child, I would imagine that it always seemed like we couldn't do anything. Certainly for my brother and I would think it was laid out that we weren't going to be able to do anything, because we, lived on a farm at times. We lived with gypsies, and we moved every 5 minutes, and it was definitely an interesting experience. But I had lots of friends from the school that we would go to when I was a little kid, in sort of like just starting at school at like 5 or 6 years old. And I don't think they had any idea of my brother and I situation. And so I learned to normalize my relationship with them. They all had toys, and they all had food, and they all had stuff that we didn't have. And so I'd go over their house and play with these great toys that they had. They had toy cars and soldiers and games and stuff, and we didn't have any of that stuff. But what we had was a farm that we lived on. So when I chose my time to walk around, I could go anywhere. I could be on the moon. I could lay in a barley field. I could pick hops. I could pick hazelnuts and cherries, and they were all fresh. I could go get strawberries if I wanted them. So it's that kind of thing of I think you are driven. You find it in yourself when someone says you can't do anything. My answer to that would be, let me tell you what you can't do. And by the way, maybe let's go on this tangent for a second. I spoke at a commencement thing for a university a few years ago. And on the way there, my wife, who's sitting next to me, said, okay, well, what's your speech going to be? And I said, I don't know. And it drove her crazy. She said, you cannot possibly go and deliver a speech just like that. And I said, honestly, I could talk about any number of topics. I guess I'll just go about the one that strikes me. And we got to the thing, and it's funny because that university that year had just got a new band leader, and he talked about how excited he was and how connected he felt to the university. And I was really moved by his speech. And I stood up on the stage and I looked at all the parents and all the students and everybody, and I said, I'm here to give you a reality check. I want to tell you all the things you cannot do. You know what you can't do? You can't come from a difficult background and find your way through college. You definitely could not be a writer in comics. There's no way that you can break into comics by going to San Diego Comic-Con and then telling the editor of, say, Hellblazer, I'd like to write your book, and having him ask you, well, what have you written? And you say, I've never written anything. You can't conquer video games. No one breaks into that industry. You can't do animation. And so the whole room was really silent. And I said, yeah, I've been told that all my life, and I've already done all of those things. So try telling me I can't do it. And everybody in the room just went, woo! That moment, and my wife is sitting at the table just seething. She's like, how do you do this? Because, it's easy to make things. Doing the business of it is hard. But ultimately, if you are confident and if you believe in yourself and you understand that you're going to be honest and you're going to work hard, especially, then you will succeed. So that fearlessness, or that tell me I can't do something, I've already probably done it. Like, why are you telling me I can't do something? I've already done it. And if I haven't done it, give me a minute, I'll figure it out. But I won't do it by myself. If I don't know how to do something, I'll ask really clever people if they can help me learn how to do it, because they're smarter than I am. That's what Ronald Reagan did when he was president.
Who were some of the artists you looked up to growing up? Books, music, art?
So music-wise, I suppose I must be the quirkiest person because I grew up in a punk era in Great Britain. first exposures to music were like punk, ska, and the place was mad, right? And so while I loved punk music and the whole punk thing, and that's again the whole thing about being fearless, that's very much a punk kind of thing. Don't talk to me about politics, don't talk to me about things that we can't do. I've already done it, right? But music wise, while everyone was listening to punk, I found some stuff that I really liked, like Kraftwerk and Jean-Michel Jarre and all these really early synthesizer wizards, you know. So I had to be the different kid. I had to be quirky. I would listen to this music, and they would all my friends would say, "What are you listening to that crap for?" It was mine. It was my thing. It was the stuff that I loved, and I wanted that, and so I wouldn't conform perhaps to what other people wanted. And when it came time to look at, what was I consuming creatively, it is really interesting to know that I didn't grow up with a television, so I don't watch television. I didn't grow up with any ability to go watch a film, so I rarely watch film. I do watch films, but not many. I don't think there was a single creative input to me as a kid except the kind of books that you read in school to get through school. I am the exception that proves the rule. I almost have none. No influences, nothing. I just watch people and I create from that. And I guess that's my thing.
Clash or Sex Pistols?
Clash.
I concur.
But what you need to do is to get into 999 and the Ruts and early Stranglers and stuff like that. You know, the Vibrators. Those are the bands. Those are the bands that were legit, right? Because Clash, cool, right? But not really. Most of us like the Ruts and the Vibrators and bands like that.
There's a band from Germany that I like. I discovered at some point called Grauzona. Grauzona. They were around for like 2 years. I'll send you a link after this. But
Cool.
and so I'm from San Diego, California, and being from San Diego and growing up in the late 90s, I was influenced largely by the Southern California punk rock scene, which was a world away from the 1970s, 1980s post-punk scenes. And we artists in San Diego kind of tell themselves stories. The narrative is that we live underneath the shade of Los Angeles. And as Ian Mackay from Minor Threat once said, that perhaps it's under the shade where art can really develop and grow.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Now, I'm curious, could you explain the culture shock you experienced once you had come into contact with Hollywood?
Yeah. See, I don't do culture shocks because nothing bothers me. I just don't. I'm that kind of person that I sort of went to Hollywood. I remember first time I ever went there. Not the first time. I think it's the second time. I was working with Ninja Turtles, and I've been working for a few years. I'm in my 50s now. But when I was there, I was really young, and I came into town, and the Northridge earthquake happened. Like I landed. Right, I got the funniest story. I landed on the plane, and I've just come all the way from Great Britain. I landed in LA, and the Northridge earthquakes happened, and I thought, blimey, they do have a lot of earthquakes over here, don't they? I thought this was normal. I thought it was an average Wednesday, And so the whole place is rocking, and the ground is shaking. And I was there with Kevin Eastman, the guy that used to one of the creators of the Ninja Turtles, right? So we were going to pitch to CBS television that next day, and I get into the hotel, and it's called the Sunset Marquis on Sunset Strip. And me, I don't care, right? I'm sort of like, I got leather jacket on, and because I don't care, because I'm not really interested in Roger Moore, who was staying there, and Bruce Springsteen, I'm like, whatever, man, they're just eating their eggs, like I don't care. They obviously thought, well, that guy's one of us. So they were absolutely certain that I was the drummer or the guitarist or someone for Metallica, right? Like Lars Ulrich or someone. And I was in a suite, so obviously there was a lot of money in it. So they're like, that guy's rich. And so they kept giving me telegrams for this guy all night. And I kept taking them back up the front desk and saying, I'm not the guy you think I am. And they would go, yeah, okay, sir, your secret's safe with us. And I'd like, I really am not that guy. So I go down the pub, the bar in the Sunset Marquis, and there's like, I think Ian Astbury from The Cult was at the bar, and Bill Maher, who is an interesting looking guy because he looks like someone died in his skin, even then. Years ago, and we're having a beer, and the ground is shaking. And Kevin's gone off to the. He asked me if I wanted to go to the Playboy Mansion, and I said no, not really, mate. And he couldn't believe I didn't want to go. And then the next morning he comes in, and it turns out that he's met Terry Jones from Monty Python. And you'll get this anecdote in a minute. So he's met Terry Jones from Monty Python, and he's all excited. I'm eating my breakfast literally across from Roger Moore, and there's a starlet. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. There's a starlet jumping in the pool in a bikini, and I'm eating my eggs. And in comes Kevin. He says, "I met Terry Jones. You can't believe it." And he's staying here. And all of a sudden, Terry Jones comes in, and Kevin says, "Terry, oh my God, you have to come over here." So Terry comes over, and Kevin says, "Terry, I'd like you to meet my friend Paul." And I said, "Hello, Terry. You know my mum from down the pub. You live in Llanidlos, right?" And this is in mid-central Wales in the middle of nowhere. And Terry said, you know Lanny?" And I said, "Yeah, you know my mum from the pub. You know Hazel?" And he said, "Are you Hazel's boy?" Right in the middle of Los Angeles, first time I'm there. Because my mum had called me the week before and said, "You'll never guess who moved around the corner from me. Terry Jones. I know him from down the pub." So now Terry doesn't want to talk to anybody. He doesn't like LA. He wants to talk to me. And everybody's like, what is going on? That pretty much encapsulates my life. Like, that stuff happens to me all the time. If you and I are in a room together and a meteor comes through the ceiling and smashes into the wall, I'll simply just go, "Yeah, I think this is pretty normal." So me and Hollywood were just like, yeah, okay. It's funny. Like I always run into like really famous people, and I don't know why. I think my life is like star-crossed or something.
How long after you landed in LA did the Northridge earthquake happen?
It landed just before the first quake happened, just as we landed, or before. I think it was, but the ground was shaking terribly. It was like aftershocks. I think crazy.
And then can you tell any other stories about your experience in Hollywood? Did you like it? Did you
Yeah, I
I
guess.
mean I'm not
Yeah,
being from San Diego and having family who worked in Hollywood, I'm not too like keen on that culture. I've
yeah,
been to
yeah,
parties in the Hollywood Hills, etc. It's a interesting universe that you sort of, I feel like in some ways, when you're just invited to a party, you need to want to be accepted to enjoy these things. But when you
yeah,
don't have when you're not yearning to be accepted, or you're comfortable in your own skin, you're kind of a fly in the wall.
yeah.
And I actually I know more people who got out of that scene than who stayed in that scene actively. So I'm just kind of curious, what was it like being an
Um,
artist there?
Yeah, to me, right, I don't care. It's all that sort of I don't care thing, I suppose, because I just sort of was there and I went, well, this is a bit goofy. And I remember the first time we went into the production company. We went into this production company, and Kevin Eastman had brought me in, the Ninja Turtle creator, and there was a guy there, and he ran out and he says, "Kevin, oh my God," and runs up to Kevin and gives him this giant hug. And I'm like, well, this guy's friendly, isn't he? And Kevin said, well, it's my friend Paul. And he introduced him. The guy ran up to me, "Paul." He ran up and gave me this giant hug. And I'm like, wow, is this weird? I don't care. And that whole Hollywood thing, the business can drive me absolutely crazy. I loathe it at times. I do think the whole stupidity of sort of saying, well, let's give this to a young hot writer from, a hot writer, a hot idea. And it's like, before they did Pirates of the Caribbean, they were told there's no way to make pirates. Before the Ninja Turtles happened, we were told there is no way to make action figures now. They will not work. Yeah? Well, thanks for telling me I can't do something. So I don't live there for a reason, right? I never lived there. I lived there one time for 6 months working on a film, and I hated every second. And guess what? I lived in the Hollywood Hills. And I couldn't get away fast enough.
I've met musicians who worked behind the scenes for well-known artists, and they often would be asked when they were going to pursue their solo career, and they all are like, "I want nothing to do with that. I'm going to
Yeah.
stay behind the scenes and
Yeah.
eventually, quicker than later, get out." So now you wanted to, let's say you just were seeking to stretch your creative muscles, and you started going down this path towards NFTs, which we'll speak about soon. Could you kind of describe that pivot, if you will, if that's what it was?
So my first pivot occurred in the early to mid 90s, actually. I've been doing comics and I've been working on lots of different things, and I got exposed to the video game industry, and we were told, all the things that you couldn't do. I remember I came in to work with a woman who worked in San Jose for a company called Crystal Dynamics. They'd asked me to come in I think I'd written a game for them, called, oh, I know, yeah, it was the Terry Jones, yeah, it was Blazing Dragons, and so they liked me and they asked me to come in and talk to them about reviving a project and helping them solve it. And it was Legacy of Kain. It was the Soul Reaver one. And so Amy and I worked together, and she was amazing because she was everything that the video game industry did not want. She was a woman. She was the head of the storytelling thing. She was, all the things were working against her, and she overcame it anyway. So she and I hit it off. We got on like a house on fire. And the first thing she told me was, this is crazy, this thing. We need to make it, but I don't want to just make any old game. I want to do a story about Gnosticism and the Ouroboros, the snake that eats its own tail. And I'm like, I'm in. Absolutely, we can do that. Everyone's going to tell us we can't. We're going to do it anyway. And so we did. And that game is always seen as a as a pivotal kind of moment in the evolution of storytelling in game. Now, Amy went on to be the creative director of at Naughty Dog. She made Uncharted. Naughty Dog made The Last of Us. These are all story-based games. I had gone on from there, innovated in elements of storytelling. So when I do think that the darkness that I did, especially, is one of the most innovative and also imitated video games that there is. We were told all the things we couldn't do, but I happened to represent the license holder, which was Top Cow Comics, and ostensibly it's a story about a guy who, he's a mobster and he's got demon arms and it's all that. And what we did was make an immersive love story using the technology of the time. We took all the limitations of game. This was really where I innovated. I said, tell me all the things I can't do. Great. Okay, now I'm not going to do those, but we're going to do everything else. And so we made a story in which they gave us money to build assets that weren't even gameplay. They were storytelling assets, and it did really well. It sold a lot of copies, even though the gameplay, I kid you not, was rated at 10 out of 100. That's bad. The multiplayer was rated at 4 out of 100. That's even worse.
That's kind of sounds like the kitschiness might have attracted certain people.
No, that didn't work. No, they didn't like the kitschy. They hated the game, but the storytelling and characterization and cinematic experience were all rated very, very highly. And it taught even 2K Games, who we did it for, it taught them a lesson. They actually kind of came to me afterwards, and they have this funny anecdote about it. They asked me to come up to Marin County, and I went up to 2K, and they sat me in a room. It was like the mob, and they said, listen. It was like they shut the door, and they said, all right, we need to talk to you. And I said, okay. And they said, we're going to do something we normally don't do. We're going to tell you the truth, which is actually quite funny. I think they were just messing with me. But so what they said was, look, we normally don't go over this with our talent, but we want to show you what happened. Look, the story, it was projected to sell 350,000 copies. It apparently sold 1.6 million. And that's with terrible gameplay. And that's because of the story. And so they said, we want you to do that again for Darkness 2. And I said, how about we do this? How about we do it better? But what always amazed me and what was always frustrating to me was that once they're all the best intentions in the world, but once we actually got into the game design, we would say, well, we want to do this. And then here come the suits and the people that say no to it. And so you constantly get these no's. No, we can't do that. No, we don't want to spend money on that. And it's like, well, you asked me to come in and do it. I've been a story consultant. I've been new technology story consultant. And every time that I come in as a consultant, they ask me how to do it. I tell them what I think you should consider, and then they ignore it.
Similarly, in the music industry, I hear that, from year to year, the executives will tell the musicians what is to be in style and to pursue that or to write songs along those lines.
Yeah, yeah, I hear it all the time. I remember an agent of mine, as a manager actually in LA, and he said, we love you, and we really think you're amazing, and we're going to do all this stuff. And I said, well, you got 12 scripts that I've written. Why aren't? And he's like, well, we just need science fiction is really hot right now. We need contained science fiction. So I called his bluff and I wrote the script. And 2 weeks later, he had the script on it. And I'm like, how's that one? Now that script we've actually sold. That script is one that people love, right? And you almost universally love it. And his reaction to it was that, yeah, this one just didn't do it for me. And I'm like, oh, so the 12 that you have in hand did, but the one that I wrote to you because you said it was hot right now, that's the one that you don't quite like? Bullshit. Sorry, you can edit that one out.
Can you tell me more about that and like what people loved about it? And
Well,
video
yeah.
game too.
Yeah, so that script is exactly what we started this conversation with. It's all about people. It's about love and connection. It's a science fiction movie in which the main character is out in deep space along with his wife, because I felt that if you're in a ship, going around this far side of Saturn, what are you thinking of? You're thinking of your connection to people at home. It's kind of like being on the submarine under the polar ice cap. You're going to be thinking of home and the people that you love. And so at its core, it's about connection and love and memories and what binds us, and I've written about that loads of times in my career in the form of an action-based science fiction movie. It does translate to game. When we were told what we couldn't do, think about it like this with the darkness, and I think perhaps this will really get the point across in terms of video game storytelling. With the darkness, you are a mobster, and fictionally, you're supposed to find the bad guys and then kill them. But that's what happens in all video games. I mean, hey, I got a gun. And my body count's going to be crazy. Do we really believe that James Bond is going to like murder 78 people and then have sex with the girl at night? That's callous. It's awful. There's nothing in it. It's cheesecake. So in the darkness, we created a conceit in which you spend quite a bit of time falling in love with a girl. And I think this is where, we innovated, and this is where we changed the way that games were always going to be made afterwards. You fall in love with a girl, but to me, you had to have everyone fall in love. So it doesn't matter your sexual orientation or your gender or your age. You can be a 60-year-old heterosexual woman. You can be a 5-year, however old you can be, a 14-year-old boy. You can be black, Asian, white. You still have to fall in love with her. So this was about the art, the actor's performance. It was about the writing. It was about the presentation. And what you did in the game was you walked in to meet the girl, and you are Jackie. Like in a movie, Tom Cruise is Jackie, but in a video game, you are Jackie. And so that's a completely different set of rules. If you're going to be Jackie, you, person, have to fall in love with the girl that he loves. So you go in and she's very kind and sweet. But what we did that was very innovative was instead of a dialogue tree, we ran a thing in which she speaks to you and she says, "Hey, Jackie, are you okay?" And you only get a choice to either lie to her or tell her the truth. So you can press X to lie to her or Y to tell her the truth. The dialogue tree will always end up bringing you to the one place. And the place it brings to you is, she says to you, "Jackie, is there something you haven't told me?" And then you only have one choice at that point, and it says, "Tell her that you love her." And when you press that choice, your character says, "Nah, no, I don't think so." And you feel guilty. You can't help it. No matter who you are, you feel guilty. 10 minutes later in the game, she has her brains blown out right in front of you, and you feel so guilty that you never told her that you love her, that you have a fictional reason to take down the people who killed her. And those are the kind of innovations that I think that we needed in storytelling to allow us to understand how this medium can work. And now, a lot of the work that we did in, say, Prototype, creating the Web of Intrigue, the Web of Intrigue is literally what became Assassin's Creed, And so I think, once you do innovate and once you take that chance, you can set up the future of storytelling in any medium, which is what leads us to NFTs. Many people would say, how do you tell a story in the NFTs? And the answer is the same way that you tell stories in other things.
When did you come across crypto as a storytelling medium? Was it straight to NFTs or did you stumble upon Bitcoin or Ethereum, etc. first?
No, I didn't know anything about crypto. I was approached by the group, and it worked like this. Actually, I wasn't approached blindly. One of the members of the Bitcoin Origins team um, is someone that I've known for a very long time, who was running the show over at Disney's Digital Interactive. So he's an amazing person who called me up and said, listen, I got this thing and I know you're not going to know what NFTs are you? And I said, no, never heard of it. But that doesn't matter, because it doesn't matter if I'd never heard of them. What matters is whether or not I can work in that space. So it was brought to me, okay, we got one of the weirdest jobs you'll see. And, some of it's going to be dictated, but other parts you're going to make up. And then, we're going to bring some new content as well. So, this project that we have, Sidekick, for example, is going to be huge. It's going to have the fun side of it. It's nice to follow a really cool story that has lots and lots of changes. It's also nice sometimes to just relax and watch, The Simpsons. Right? There's a place for that too. So the moment I saw NFTs and realized, look, it's so many things that you can do with digital interactive. But I have pitched new forms of storytelling across digital media for many, many years. When I had my first conversation about NFTs with the group, I pitched them back about 6 things that I wanted to do. And they said, look, wow, we never thought of those. And I said, I've been thinking of that stuff for about 15 years. So can we do any of these things? And the answer was yes.
What seemed unique about NFTs? And how long did it take you to wrap your head around them?
Okay, so what's unique? They're great opportunities, right? What is it that's unique? Well, to some extent, nothing is unique about a form of storytelling. There's nothing unique about story. They've all been told, but they haven't been told in particular ways. They haven't all been told by me or you or other people. So, to some extent, what was unique was that they were collectibles. So the first thing you look at is, what does it feel like to have a collectible? What is the first thing that struck me? And what struck me was that I've been a big fan in game design of free-to-play mobile games and free-to-play apps. From Fortnite, which proved the model but blew themselves apart as well. They lost most of their audience, I'm sure now, or maybe they did, I don't know. But wow, that thing went up and then created. Creatively, it felt like it created as well. They really didn't do a good job with that game, except of course they did an amazing job with it. I know I sound very contradictory, but free to play, right? You get a community and you build a community, and then that community will kind of keep coming back to you because you're just continuing, and it's based on trust. If you rip them off, they know they're not coming back. What an amazing way to create an interactive set of story with a community, So I looked at that and I said, that's the model. It's like a free-to-play mobile app. It's a free-to-play model. It's a free to join. It's a free to be involved. And those people will love you forever if you give them a product that has this great kind of connection to them. And so that's what we've been doing with Bitcoin Origins, and we're going to do with Sidekick and some of the other projects. We're going to really show people how you take collectible aspects, like baseball cards is the easiest way of putting it, and you do storytelling, you do puzzles. There's puzzles in Bitcoin Origin, I'm just catching up to the puzzles sometimes, which I think is really funny. You build out loads, and there are so many things that you can do with digital. It can deliver sound, can't it? Sound is just code embedded. We should be able to do so many things. And so when I met the guys and they asked me, well, what do you think of this? I pitched about 80 things that probably were really annoying and said, can we do this? Can we do this? Can we do this? There's so much that can be done. You can program a card that it will change 30 days after you put it out. Well, great. I can change my story later. There's so much that can be done. So I fell in love with NFTs immediately because they have such value. they will continue to climb in value over time. And what will happen is the good ones will separate from the wheat from the chaff. You know, I was also amazed but not surprised at how many poor quality NFTs there are.
I think it's a burgeoning industry, the crypto industry, and there are so many altcoins of little
Yeah,
to zero quality. In
yeah,
fact, many
yeah,
of them are just a means of for the issuers, the token issuers, to acquire more Bitcoin. So, I'm
yeah.
curious, where do you see NFTs in 10 years?
What, what will happen is that NFTs have to have an inherent value, right? Nothing has. There's an interesting thing that's happened in the world. Yeah. At first, we could look at it. Actually, here's a great. I was working for a video game company, and there was a young guy, really smart guy, who worked with us, and we had problems with a game that we'd been working on being ripped off. Basically, someone had actually taken a zip drive and had dropped it in the parking lot of the game company I worked for, and it said my resume on it. Somebody came in, put it in their computer, trying to work out whose resume it was, and bam, they got stolen. Like the whole game was ripped off. Right? It was really clever, but really annoying because you got millions of dollars into these games. And so I'm working with this guy, and he said to me, I said, "Well, I'm just trying to do something." And he said, well, "I can get you that all for free. Give me a Mac." And he basically showed me like ways in which I can steal everything that I wanted. And so I said to him, "Look, I'll be honest with you. Like, I make my money from royalties, and maybe I'm just old fashioned or something. I don't feel like stealing it, and I don't see the value. You work for a company that can't pay you if everything is stolen, and you're still willing to steal everything else. Where's the commerce in all of this?" So for the longest time, it really messed me up. I couldn't work out where was the commerce in everyone thinking that they can basically, just steal everything that was digital. Doesn't make any sense to me. So blockchain and crypto doesn't necessarily provide for that theft, right? People can rip you off and they can try, but ultimately, once you have like sort of verifiable assets, they're going to be verifiable. And at that point, you can say, well, I would like to steal it, or I'd like to change the code, or rip it off basically, but you can't really do it. And that seems valuable to me. Now, the other side of this was that over time, the game makers and all of that adapted to the fact that they were constantly getting ripped off. And so they started changing the model. And so the free to play model became something. It's free to play like Candy Crush. But if you want to speed up in Candy Crush, then just give us a buck and you can speed up a little bit. That's a tremendous model. In fact, Radiohead, the band, I believe, they were so tired of getting ripped off that they put one album out for free and said, just give us money if you like it. And they made 4 times as much money with that than anything they'd ever put out before. So you can rely on your community and trust and the nurturing of a community to pay you. And, to some extent, that seems to be what Bitcoin Origins and our group are going to do. We're going to provide incredible value, and people are going to pay us for it.
Yeah, I often forget about that example, but I believe it was their album In Rainbows in 2007
Yeah,
where it
yeah,
was
I
a
think so. Yeah,
donation. It was a
yeah,
donation model.
hmm yeah,
So in we're still seeing this work itself out today. And it's odd because I think that people are not really ripping CDs anymore in the 90s, or actually not 90s, but at the turn of the century, Napster was a big thing, then BitTorrent, and getting the albums
mhm,
before they were released was kind of like a given. And now, perhaps because there's so much content, people are uninterested. And not to mention, Hollywood itself is really kind of going through a evolutionary phase. We're not sure what it's going to look like, and
yeah,
I'm not sure how it's going to compete with the storylines of the daily news. I'm
yeah.
curious now. Looking at the story of Bitcoin, the history of Bitcoin,
Mhm,
you are kind of working in a with nonfiction these
yeah,
days.
yeah.
What are your impressions of working with nonfiction and the story of Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, the story of Bitcoin is fascinating, right? Like like I said, I'm sort of like catching up to it. I mean, a lot of my work is done behind the scenes. I'm obviously concentrated on not only Sidekick as well, but also another project that we have, and we're about to pull in a couple of projects. So I'm really busy right now. That being said, obviously, in order to build out the website and do the things that we're doing, we have to make sure that we are in a compelling way telling the story of Bitcoin. And coming in initially, the first question that you would ask is, hang on a minute, are you saying that the guy that created it doesn't exist, or no one knows who that is? And the answer is, yeah, no one knows who it is. And I thought, well, that's fascinating. But ultimately, that's just a little hook. That's really not what it is. What is so fascinating about Bitcoin is that it sort of said to everybody, we believe that because of the positive aspects of cryptocurrency, this will have value that can't be manipulated by other people. So to me as a punk, I'm like, are you saying basically this was like power to the people? Right, I'm in. Like that for me, that works, right? Yeah, great. Like, so the people actually have the power in crypto, that you can't do the kind of things that you see happening in the stock market. And it's funny that you and I are talking about this right now, because look what has happened in our last few days. In the last few days, a bunch of punks basically looked at what was happening with short sales, and they were frustrated, and so they said, you know what, let's just go and like take it to the hedge funds. And they went after the hedge funds by artificially, to some extent, inflating the stock price of GameStop. I feel that people are like that. Everybody wants to be, and who did they get let down by? Well, Robin Hood. I mean, they're called Robin Hood because it's supposed to be financial power for the people, and Robin Hood basically shut them off. So Robin Hood wasn't Robin Hood after all. So I think everybody likes the idea that crypto is a bit punk, isn't it? It's a bit like, look, no one's going to tell you, no one's going to be able to manipulate that finance to do a thing particularly. People will, they always will, but no government's going to be able to say, hey, we changed our mind. This is not now measuring up to the gold standard. We're just going to print money when we see it, or it's going to be, there's 21 million of them, and that's as many as there are, and they're going to be as valuable as they are because people believe they're that valuable. Everyone said it can't be done for the longest time. I just saw one thing that I thought was pivotal is that there's an offensive lineman who plays for Seattle, and he just decided he wanted his new contract in Bitcoin. Good for him, because, hey, it's a chance. But if he ends up being right, he's going to be a multi-billionaire in a few years' time.
And Russell Okung, who is the
That's it,
player
yeah.
that, yeah, he actually really sort of, I think, provides an ideal for the mentality that drove Bitcoin, especially in its early years. I think a lot of the early Bitcoiners in the US, at least, were inspired by Austrian School of Economics, which is kind of a laissez-faire free market model of economics. They were perhaps leaning libertarian, particularly in the early years. And many people argue that, in fact, Satoshi might have been inspired by Austrian economics. And these are kind of the ideas that Russell Okung espouses on his Twitter quite openly. And, you know, Orwell must be rolling in his grave, because I guess Robin Hood should have been called Sheriff of Nottingham all
That is
along.
absolutely right. Yes. They weren't Robin Hood, were they?
And so now, also to get into like the early storylines of Bitcoin, reading some of the early threads on bitcointalk.org, which were largely, which was a forum that was founded by Satoshi Nakamoto, gives a lot of insights into that mentality. So I'm just
Right.
curious, can you kind of continue about the story of Bitcoin as you see it and how it's portrayed in Bitcoin Origins?
Yeah, so one of the things that is because it's not just a story, is it? It's also, I mean, it's real life, right? These are the things, and so what we've gotten a chance to do is to sort of interpret the information that we're given, and then we we're able to kind of express ourselves artistically to some extent, to look at certain pivotal moments in the creation and development of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general to some extent. It is fascinating to think of the foresight in the Genesis block. Like, what did it represent? And the fact that one person and or a group of people, if they are a group of people, could, had the foresight to put out a thing of this potential is kind of amazing to me, you know? They really saw it, didn't they? Whoever Satoshi Nakamoto is, they really saw that this was going to be something, and they believed in it. And I'm all for it, right? I'm like, how did you think of that? The next pivotal moment was the sending of the first transaction with Hal Finney. Hal Finney's an interesting person. Hal Finney sadly died of Lou Gehrig's disease, or ALS, years later, a few years later, but got to be a pivotal person in the creation of Bitcoin and its sort of implementation. One of the things that I'm fascinated with right now is in the third moment that we're doing with Bitcoin Origins, they're talking about Pizza Day, and Pizza Day is usually seen by people as, oh, what a shame, this guy Laszlo, whatever, I can't remember his last name. He bought two pizzas, or he gave somebody 10,000 Bitcoin to get him two pizzas. It was almost like to prove a model. But understand that the Bitcoin had no value at that point. So he really is instrumental in creating value by making a purchase with Bitcoin. Well done. Most people look at that as a terrible story, but that guy has always said, no, that wasn't a bad idea. That was all part of what we were trying to do, to give it value. At that point, we knew how much Bitcoin was worth. It was worth, 25 or sort of like $40 or something like that for 10,000. So that's how much it was worth. But it grew. I can't imagine that guy gave away all of his Bitcoin. I'm sure he gave away a lot, but he probably has plenty of them still. So I imagine he's doing okay. Thanks very much. And were it not for him, we wouldn't see value. So part of moment 3 in Bitcoin Origins is about the frustration of somebody who would love to have all those Bitcoins. A large part of it shows Laszlo like planting a seed and growing a tree and growing an entire industry to some extent. If not for that guy, we wouldn't, that first step wouldn't have been taken. So the whole thing is incredibly fascinating because it is a testament to the foresight of Satoshi Nakamoto and the people who helped them create cryptocurrency to some extent.
I want to speak to Hal Finney, but before we go there, I'll say that I was speaking with an early Bitcoin miner who told me that he once gifted an Amazonian tribe 500 Bitcoins in 2011, and they haven't quite figured out how to use the Bitcoins, but that they are holding on to them, and
Great.
he works with them still to this day. And that 500 Bitcoins, I don't think was by any means a majority of the Bitcoins that he had mined. Hal Finney is an interesting character indeed. In fact, he was one of the earliest characters that I was drawn to. He was alive when I was still in the space. I believe he passed away in 2014, and he was active, and his health did decline. He gave updates on the bitcointalk.org forum about that. But an interesting side story is that he lived nearby to Dorian Nakamoto, who was doxxed as Satoshi Nakamoto by Newsweek.
Yeah. No, that is fascinating. Yeah, because that person's image now has been used everywhere. Dorian Nakamoto. Oh, it must have been Dorian Nakamoto. Well, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe because Satoshi Nakamoto is very much a name that is used as a pseudonym across the world, especially in Asia. And what may have happened is that Hal Finney, who knew who Satoshi Nakamoto was, may have said, yeah, I got a guy who lives down the road called Dorian Nakamoto, and that person or group said, oh, yeah, we'll use Nakamoto. That's just as feasible as anything else.
I think another funny story is that when an early Bitcoin programmer was his name's escaping me right now. I'll edit it in, but Gavin Andreessen was speaking with Satoshi, and he was often in communication with Satoshi, and Satoshi disappeared after Gavin informed him that he had gone to the CIA to explain Bitcoin to them.
Yeah.
How are you learning about Bitcoin? What resources have you found most
So
people?
yeah, I do a lot of research, and I do, to do my part of the job. Really, like I said, I'm sort of catching up to what the team give me at times. We are handed content, and we just kind of follow that content. Um, but even just being handed that content and basically given um, pieces, it's up to us to kind of create the storytelling methods by which that information can be given. And sometimes the materials I'm given are very, very specific. I want to say this, I want to say that, I want this, I want that. These are the elements you have to write. And I go, okay, I have no idea what they mean, but I do that anyway. So it's been a trip, definitely. It's confusing at times, but not confusing because I'm not really afraid of it. So I do the best I can. I get lots of notes though.
What's next for Bitcoin Origins? What do people need to know? Any concluding comments?
Well, yeah. So I think it's this. For as far as we know internally, first thing would be that we are going to get through moment 5, which is Mount Gox, and that's to do with Magic the Gathering exchange, which is really funny, really interesting, very intriguing. Once we get there, we're going to go through 15 total moments that get us through the origin of Bitcoin. And then most likely we will go to a new project on Bitcoin, which will be the evolution of cryptocurrencies and go to the smaller coins and look at Ethereum and, just what cryptocurrencies became. So there's definitely a lot of story to be told because it is fascinating. And there's so many moments and pieces of this story.
Thank you, Paul, for sitting down with us today. We sat down with Paul Jenkins. He's got a storied career. He's also a key person working on Bitcoin Origins, which you can find at btcorigins.com, I believe. Where else can people find you, Paul?
People can find me personally at my Paul Jenkins on Twitter. They can also find me on Facebook, I am sure. And don't bother with Instagram. I got one and I do it sometimes, but not very often. There's only so many of those I can manage. So I figure it's Twitter and Facebook for the moment.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for sitting down with us. And thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.